Is there a step beyond atheism? A strange question, perhaps, but one that I think is warranted, given that many people, I think, are turning off and away from atheism. So you're seeing these videos pop up and these podcasts about the rise and fall of new atheism. As you all know, of course, the new atheists were sort of a band of public intellectuals: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Ayin Hirsi Ali, or Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, other people. And, there was this was post 9/11, so people were concerned with Islamic fundamentalism. And people are also concerned with, conservative Christian nationalists in the States and the power and influence they have. And so a lot of people, got fed up with the respect of how much we're supposed to respect piety, and said, to hell with all that. We're going to, pardon the cliche, we're going to speak truth to power, and we're going to publicly state that all this is poppycock and nonsense, and irrational and harmful to our species, harmful to the social body, and we should aim off and away from religious belief and religious practice. And now people are sort of looking back at the new atheists to try to reevaluate them, to try to think about their place in history and what they accomplished, if anything. And it seems to be like a pretty standard tale of a group of people that became popular, and then other things became popular in their stead. And the cycle just keeps going. It never ends. But even so, there have still been people who, have moved away from new atheism to, like, Jordan Peterson. That some people think that atheism is a cold worldview. It's a painful worldview, and they just don't want to deal with it anymore. They want the consolations of faith. Now, so when I think about whether we can move beyond atheism, I guess what I'm wondering is, are the categories that we're using maybe too limited to get at some greater insight to this matter? Now, I should say I'm an agnostic atheist, more or less. I've been calling myself an agnostic atheist, even though some people think that's a contradiction in terms, since my mid-teens. The agnostic bit just meaning I don't know, the atheist bit being what I believe. And again, my perspective on that generally hasn't shifted. If you put me in a philosophy seminar and you ask me, these tough epistemological questions, or these tough metaphysical questions, I have to land down on the side of skepticism, and say, I can't conceptualize a higher power. I don't think there's any higher power that cares about me or my family or my friends or anything really. Certainly not an anthropomorphic being Allah is just Allah the Bible. Again, that just seems to me to be a truth we have to face, whether you like it or not. And, sometimes I've felt envious of believers. Sometimes I've sort of wished that my doubts didn't run so deep. But you can't choose. Like, belief isn't a choice. You either believe or you don't. Well, I say you either believe or you don't, but that's actually getting at sort of the categories that I'm like wanting us to explore here, because maybe belief isn't so one-sided as you might think it is. I mean, to think about an example of this. So I think it was Christopher Hitchens who talked about, he was never sure people actually believed. He thought a lot of people actually didn't believe and just said they believed. You could explain that sort of picture, I think, if we don't think of beliefs as something unchanging. Now, again, that's setting aside truth claims totally for a moment. But if we just think about an individual believing something, we could say it's possible for someone to believe something in one moment and not the next. So, I mean, so I have this habit. I mean, I picked it up from my mother, but I have this habit of, like a lot of people do, knocking on wood. So, someone just brings up something bad that hasn't happened. Oh, knock on wood. I don't have any wood right now, or I would knock. But that's sort of an example where, like, well, do I believe that the wood is do I believe that that's actually changing anything about the metaphysical nature of the world? Do I really believe that knocking on wood is preventing anything bad from happening? I mean, when you put it like that, no. Right? It's obviously that's silly. Obviously, it's a superstition that I have. But I still go through the motions as if I believe. So it's as if in one moment I don't believe this superstitious thing, but in another moment I do. Or one part of me believes this superstitious thing, and another part of me doesn't. Now I recognize that beliefs are sort of part higher faculty processes. And I bring that up because what I'm saying makes it seem like beliefs are more unconscious. Excuse me. I mean, maybe, actually, I suppose that is the case if you think about it. I mean, we consciously express what we think we believe, but we also, I think, have met people who say they believe one thing, but like we don't really think they believe it. Or, we might be in a process where we don't really know what we believe, and we're sort of figuring that out as we go along. So I think what I'm trying to say here is belief isn't so one-sided. It's not so static. It's not so black and white. It's not so you believe in this or you don't. It's sort of a gradient of believing, or like it's a matter of changes in one's mental state and changes in one's context. So, I mean, when I walk outside, I believe the external world is real. if you put me again back into a philosophy seminar and someone asks, is the external world real? Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if I would say I believe it in that context. But it is something that I believe. So I guess as this relates to like atheism and theism, or deism, or agnosticism, and so forth. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's the case that someone is just X. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's the case that people's beliefs can be categorized in such a clear-cut way. And this also goes back to just the difficulties surrounding various concepts from our theological traditions, but by which I mean a word like God can be defined in like a bajillion ways. You can define God more or less however you want to, but based on how you define God, you might get very different answers as to whether or not someone believes. So as I said earlier, if God is a higher being that cares about my sex life, I don't believe. If God is, I don't know, in I think some posthumous works by Kant, he sort of merged God and conscience. So God is conscience. God is that little voice in your head that tells you right and wrong, say. Well, I mean, you could say I believe in that sort of God. I mean, part of me wants to say, well, that's almost a silly definition of God, but, I mean, there you go. Or if you say God is just, if you're a pantheist, God is just existence. Well, okay, I believe in that sort of God. I believe in, like, the Spinoza type God, I suppose you could say. Or is God like that sense of wonder or interconnectedness? So I was at a, concert once with a friend, and he was talking about how, that's his view of God. It's that feeling of being together with a bunch of people for a common purpose. As if like individuality sort of blurs into the collective. I'm paraphrasing, but he was saying something of that sort. So, I mean, I don't want to be like the Jordan Peterson, like, well, it depends what you mean by... Okay, I can't. I used to be able to do a Jordan Peterson accent impression. You've got to save your... It depends what you mean by God and belief. You've got to save your father from the belly of the whale. I mean, I don't want to be that obscurantist about it. But I guess I am just wondering if in my own life, the category of atheist is as fixed or rigid as I once thought it was. So just a brief story, or not really a story, but so I've been visiting a local Reform synagogue for a little bit now, just off and on, since about April of last year. And I just feel a certain pull, towards the Jewish community. just feel a certain pull towards, their sense of social justice, their sense of solidarity, um, their um, their rejection of idol worship, their rejection of, I guess you could call it like false gods, or their rejection of the Messiah having the rejection of the idea of the Messiah having come. So there seems to be like a wisdom there in that tradition, the wisdom of sort of wrestling with this idea of the divine, this image of questioning and not settling and not saying there's an answer right now. I find myself very attracted to that sort of worldview. It just so happens that, well, the reform movement itself is on paper theist, reconstructionist, and humanist. Judaism can accept more explicit non-belief. And so, I'm finding myself in this sort of weird predicament, I guess you could say, because I still don't think I believe. In any real, like, meaningful sense. Again, unless it's like the Spinoza or Spinoza a sense, or like a more metaphorical sense of God. Although then again, some people say Spinoza was a deeply religious man, so there you go. But I still find myself drawn to this, ancient tradition. Even if I can't quite get behind the theology. And again, I don't really know how to think about that. And which is making me think, am I arriving at a position beyond atheism? Am I saying, well, I still don't know if I believe, but I want to struggle with the idea regardless? Which is not, I want to be clear about this. What I don't have time for or respect for is a leap of faith. I have no respect for a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. I mean, if other people want to do it, that's their business. But just theoretically speaking, that seems very much to be a cop-out. And I think, it's a way of saving religion from a lot of criticism. It's a way of saying, well, we can just sidestep these criticisms because it's not a question about reason. It's not a question that reason can answer. So therefore, those criticisms don't matter. It's basically the equivalent of sticking your fingers in your ears and going la 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 la. It's deliberately moving the goalpost so you don't have to think about it. So you don't have to worry about these theological difficulties. That I don't, I reject that whole cloth. I'm not advocating for a leap of faith. I have no use for a leap of faith. I have no faith in that sense. But again, this idea of, this is where I think, I'm under the impression this is where the word Israel actually comes from, like the one who wrestles with God, or the one who struggles with God. See, struggling with God, that I think I've been doing most of my life. Struggling with the idea of the God concept. if you will, that I think I've been engaged with off and on for a really long time now. Because it seems like, questions about religion are some of the most interesting questions you could ask and some of the most important questions you could ask. Because it is both about, culture and community and moral issues, but it is also about, well, how does the world actually work? So, some people will say, like the late Stephen Jay Gould talked about how, like, oh yeah, we can separate religion and science because religion talks about, or science talks about, science tries to describe the natural world, and religion is just about culture and morals. It's like, no, you can't quite say that. That's also a cop out because traditionally, religion has tried to explain how the natural world works. Granted, I don't think it's the best tool to do so, and I don't think a lot of the answers that have come from I don't think the religion's explanations for the natural world often turn out to be correct. I do think there's something to this idea of, needing to wrestle with the idea of, needing to wrestle with existence, needing to wrestle with, sort of, if you want to put it like this, the fundamental mysteriousness of the universe. I mean, and if you want to put it, in terms of the God concept, you can do so. But that is one way. That is one path, I guess, towards a sort of religious life, spiritual life, or at least religious practice, which I could see growing out of atheism. Because atheism, wonderful thing about atheism, it just gets rid of all the debris and mush. It's like it's one of those like big, heavy dumpster trucks that's just like getting rid of all the garbage. Atheism is very good at getting rid of all the garbage. And again, I by no means repudiate atheism. I can't. I mean, to some extent, atheism and theism are forever intertwined. You can't have one without the other. But I guess I might be coming to, and I'm not sure, I'm still like working through this myself, but I think I'm coming to this idea of religious practice as a way to channel both like skeptical worries and challenges and concerns, as well as gaining community, and expressing your values systems through it. I mean, so religion without religion, it would that phrase wouldn't be quite accurate, but it would be, I don't know, maybe a form of religious humanism. a sort of worldly religion. And I do see sort of the Jewish tradition as primarily focused on this world, on the here and now, and doing what we can to better the here and now. And there's also this idea in the Jewish tradition of sort of collaborating with God. Not so much that God created the world and left it alone, or created the world in some necessary way, but God created the world, and we have to continue creating a good one. So I don't know. I mean, again, am I still an atheist? Probably. I don't think I can really say I'm not. I think it'd be disingenuous to say I wasn't. But is it possible that I could be that I could find a way to? Is it possible that atheism could lead me to a kind of religious practice? I suppose so. I don't know, and I'd have to think about it more. And this is a very personal video, and it's not something I talk about with a lot of people. But I wanted to get my thoughts out there because I do think there could be value in almost withholding to atheism within a religious tradition itself. So I don't know if it, not quite like being an oppositional figure from within, like not trying to infiltrate something to like undermine the whole thing, but trying to, but like retaining your beliefs, retaining your principles, but allowing yourself to explore and question and just work through the kinds of questions that people have asked since there have been people. I don't know. You guys can let me know what you think in the comments. Yeah, so is there a step beyond atheism?